Hey, this is Jim Bush with Live Down Show. In the news views, Robertson, organizational framework and decision-making framework called Holacracy, I believe to be a great alternative to centralized planning, to democracy, obviously, right? Technocracy also. So maybe you can first start by sharing a little bit, like a general overview of what Holacracy is, how it's useful.
Yeah, so it's a framework for organizing.
Okay.
Which, we're used to frameworks for organizing. We have in companies management hierarchy. It's the dominant framework. Holacracy is an alternative. It's a different way of getting to who does what, who makes which decisions, who controls what, how do we break down resources, how do we get alignment, all the things we need for management. Holacracy gives us an alternate way of getting management that doesn't use a top-down command hierarchy of managers. It's more decentralized.
So is this something that's more intended for companies rather than like social organizations, or it can be applicable for any group of people?
So it's for any organization, and I define organization pretty broadly. It's when there are people working together to achieve some aim or some result together, right? So that doesn't have to be a formal company, although it could be. It could be people working together to put on a festival like we're at now. It could be a volunteer group working together to make something happen. But there's got to be work. It's not for just living, cohabitating together. Although often when you cohabitate, there is work to be done as well. And it's for that part. Yes, it's for that part.
Okay. So if you could share, just in your opinion, because you came up with this framework, did you see any problems with the predominant framework, like you said, that's centralized management, board of directors, CEO, lower management, upper management, kind of a lot of bureaucracy. So what are some of the problems you see with that framework?
Well, first of all, I mean, who hasn't seen problems with that, right? Like, in your experience, have you ever felt limited in that kind of structure? My experience working in those companies was I often couldn't drive change. The system resisted change. Sure. Right? I would often have ideas or insights on how to improve things, and it was really difficult. It was like the whole system was built to resist the effort to change or improve, right? Let alone giving me the power and autonomy and authority to actually run with something and make something happen. It was just constantly fighting against the system. So my background as an entrepreneur, I started my own software company intentionally to experiment, to look for, there's just got to be a better way to organize this. And Holacracy grew out of a lot of on-the-ground experimentation of just how do we allow anything sensed by anyone, anywhere in the company, somewhere to go where it can drive meaningful change.
Okay. So how does it work? How does Holacracy work? What does a Holacracy organization look like?
Yeah, so let me use a metaphor first for that. My favorite example of an organization is the human body. Trillions of cells working together. There's no CEO cell telling the others what to do. There's no top-down command hierarchy of cells bossing others around.
DNA?
It's an element for sure, but it's not a command hierarchy. It's the DNA isn't around, telling you what to do and how to break down and all that. It does give you a blueprint, but even that is in the context of this massively complex living system. Every cell has autonomy. Every cell is self-organizing within its bounds, but it's also part of a larger entity. It's not just running away doing whatever. It's grouped together into an organ that's autonomous, but part of something larger. So that's kind of the structure Holacracy uses. Every role, it's a role-based system. Every role, and you might fill 20 roles in your company in multiple teams. Every role has autonomy. You have a job to do, and you have the real authority to get there. You have, and it's clarified. You know the decision-making rights you have, what decisions you make, and where the edges of that are. When you need to go check in with somebody else, and why and who. And those roles aren't organized in a command hierarchy. They're decentralized. So in my company, I do our trainings, and I have a lot of autonomy. I do our trainings. Somebody else chooses where we do our trainings, and that's her role, and that's her job to lead. Somebody else chooses the venues for our trainings, and that's her job, right? So it's decentralizing autonomy, clarifying roles and decision rights. Roles are grouped into teams or circles, and anyone on that team filling a role is invited to a governance process where they can propose changing any other role in the team, any policy of the team. They can create new roles, merge roles, split roles, define the responsibilities of roles so you can get clear on what you expect of each other. That's typically work a manager would do in a management hierarchy, but here we have a process that invites everyone on the team to participate in the work of so instead of centralizing that in a single manager.
Someone comes up with the idea for the organization or for the ultimate goal or the mission, right? And then they kind of just I guess they would have to train people and teach people this framework, and then it kind of just takes on a life of its own.
Yeah, it's obviously the goal is to get it to be something that's just how we work around here, right? It's not about the framework; it's about the work you do. And there's a transition to get there, and that's hard, right? People are used to management hierarchy. We grow up in often authoritarian parent-child relationships, right? We learn to externalize our power to some external authority. We're in a society that teaches us again and again, give up your power to some other external authority, right? And so there is a relearning and a shifting of how to own your power, lead your piece, lead your role, and work with others without getting in the way of their power to lead their piece, right? So there is a significant learning curve for companies adopting this, but once you're up that learning curve, then it's just kind of the way things work around here.
There's probably a lot of letting go, especially for leaders tend to have ego issues. You know, you kind of got to just set all that aside and trust the process.
Yeah, and it's not just the leaders; it's everyone. It's just as hard for other people sometimes to step up and take real autonomy, and own, and not hide behind a boss or hide behind a group and what the group wants, right? But to lead their piece. And it's hard for the managers to let go of the way they're controlling things, but ultimately it's not reducing the power of managers, it's not raising the power of the system.
So I have led businesses and active organizations years now, and I've been conscious as a leader of the importance of empowering people and letting people take lead on things and kind of just helping to make sure the ball is moving down the field. But I've found more often than not, unless you find the right people, people still look to a leader for direction. Do you have any advice or any insight on how to, I don't know, train initiative into people?
Yeah, so often the challenge there, it's not enough to just tell people you're empowered, right? If you're leading a team, you go to people and say you're empowered. That doesn't actually help. You get a lot of confused people because people know there's really some limits on their power. So one of the ironies is if you want an empowered environment, you need to as much clarify the boundaries. If people don't know the limits of their power, they don't know their freedom. If people don't know what they can't do without talking to someone, they don't know what they can do without talking to anyone. So often what you need is a framework for clarifying boundaries within which people can be deeply, completely empowered. So, and then you need to build the habits of using that new framework, that new language, the clarity it provides. So a lot of this is about habit change once you have a set of processes that are going to get you there. But man, that's hard, and it's not enough within a management hierarchy to just tell people you're empowered, even if they buy it. If people need you to empower them, what's that saying about the system they're in? They're in a fundamentally disempowered system if you need the authority to empower you. What I want to see is empowered environments that invite people to find and use their real power within an environment or a process or a framework that they can really find and use power within.
Cool. I mean, ideally, you start the organization with this framework, so you don't have to.
That's great. Yeah, totally.
How does this different from sociocracy?
Yeah, sociocracy doesn't go nearly as far. So sociocracy basically still has the command hierarchy in it. It just wraps teams with a policy setting function that often binds the manager too. But outside of that policy setting function, managers still have autocratic control within the team. So it's still a top-down command hierarchy. It's just one that has a process wrapped around it. And that process is often based on consensus, which I used sociocracy before I developed Holacracy. I found it to be incredibly limiting. What I want is,
jam stuff up.
Yeah, I call it the tyranny of consensus. Everyone has a voice and nothing can get done, right? So what I want is something that lets people use their voice, but for a purpose within some constraints or bounds, and one that isn't still relying on the crutch of just the top-down command hierarchy, but really clarifies who leads what, so we don't need the same command hierarchy.
Okay.
Holacracy goes further.
How does a holacracy scale? Is it more apt to scaling than a centralized organization?
I think so. From experience, we've only seen it run. The largest organizations we've seen are in the 2,000 employee, a little bit more than that.
That's a big company.
Yeah, and it scales beautifully to that. The structure itself is a fractal structure. It's an organic structure. Theoretically, it should scale better than management hierarchy, which often I think starts really feeling its limits. It's much more of a team of teams, so it still feels like you've got small groups, even in a 2,000 person company, if you do it well. That said, we don't have the data yet, so I can't say for sure.
Okay, cool. All right, well, I appreciate your time. Is there a website people can go to learn more?
Yeah, holacracy.org, and people misspell it all the time. It's HOLACRACY.org.
Okay, cool. All right, well, thank you so much for taking the
Thanks
time to chat with us.
Thanks, everyone. Cool.
All right. Thank you. All right. Hey, you take care.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for helping spread the word.
Yeah, man.